Chapter 1528. I'm a pervert. I'm scary. I've always wanted your body. I'm shamelessly longing for it every day. She cried as she spoke. Tang Yu's perverted heart was finally satisfied and he let go of her. Pei Chi cried as she lay in his arms. She secretly wiped her tears and snot on his mouth, secretly taking revenge. How could Tang Yu not know? But he let her be. He was happy that she was so childish. It meant that she could really rely on him. She was exhausted. She lay in his arms, biting and sucking. Although he was satisfied, he couldn't help but feel a little aroused. However, he didn't dare to play with her anymore. He reached out and stroked her long hair. There was an indescribable satisfaction in his heart. He had a wife and a daughter. This kind of life was already perfect. Was it really that important to have another child? Xiaoxin was already cute enough. He couldn't bear to let Chi-Chi suffer again. Let nature take its course. Tang Yu patted the sweaty little body in his arms. He put her down gently and got off the bed to dry her up with a towel. She was sleeping. No matter how gentle he was, she was still woken up. The spoiled woman's little foot kicked out, landing right on Tang Yu's unparalleled handsome face. He was stunned for a moment. In the end, he grabbed her little foot and bit it. This little bastard. As they kissed, he became a pervert again and bullied her without a care in the world. Meanwhile, Qin Anlin was still scolded by Dr. Mei in the middle of the night. Not only that, Yi Liangqiu was not spared either. This matter was between the two parties. If the woman was not willing, he would use force. You're not a 3-year-old anymore. Even if you drink, you can't be so reckless. Dr. Mei reprimanded him. Fortunately, it was not a big deal. He just needed an 4-drip. Qin Anlin brought her back to the condominium. He carefully carried her to the bed and knelt by the bed. He held her hand and bit it. Don't drink anymore. Don't mess around before the child is born. Yi Liangqiu lay down weakly and reached out to touch his hair. He must have been scared out of his wits. Anlin, I'm fine. She smiled and comforted him. Qin Anlin looked up and his eyes were deep. Liangqiu, it's useless for you to seduce me. I won't do it. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She ruffled his hair. How could he be so cute? Early in the morning, Lady Qin got the news and came to beat Qin Anlin up. Qin Anlin kept his head down and didn't say a word. So, a man's pleasure and punishment were directly proportional. Lady Qin had wanted to stay behind to watch over the couple to prevent them from doing anything out of line. Mom, I am not a child anymore. Qin Anlin sighed. Auntie Xiao can take care of you at home. I can take care of Liangqiu. Lady Qin snorted. You can take care of her. Take care of her so much that she has to go to the hospital again and again. What a beast. Couldn't he tolerate it? Qin Anlin looked at Yi Liangqiu. Yi Liangqiu buried her face in the blanket. She was too ashamed to face anyone. Romance? She didn't even want to think about it. Qin Anlin saw that he couldn't do anything and looked at Qingxiu. Qingxiu naturally understood his intentions. She smiled and said, Old madam, they are living together. What's wrong with me here? She paused and said softly, It's not convenient. Chapter 1529. Qin Anlin's face was slightly red as he looked at Yi Liangqiu affectionately. Little one, she wasn't like this even when she was comfortable. If anything happened, he would have to bear the responsibility alone. But he would rather bear the responsibility himself. How could he bear to let her be scolded with him? Yi Liangqiu glanced at him and didn't say much. Lady Qin didn't stay for long either. She was furious when she saw her son's lustful look. Lady Qin left with cutie show. Qin Anlan's gaze fell on his wife's face. His gaze was gentle. What do you want to eat? She didn't speak and just looked at him. Qin Anlan reached out and stroked her head. My mom brought some bird's nest over. I'll add some milk for you. She nodded and watched him go to the kitchen. After about 5 minutes, he sat on the bed and adjusted her position, feeding her patiently. She ate in small bites and looked up at him with a gentle expression. Qin Anlan smiled and reached out to stroke her long hair again. Silly. She ate a small bowl, indicating that she couldn't eat anymore. He left the rest in the fridge for her to eat in the afternoon. After eating, he forced her to sleep. She wasn't allowed to get up so that she could take care of the fetus. When she woke up, Qin Anlan was sitting on the sofa in the bedroom, reading some documents with a focused expression. But when she woke up, he looked up. You're awake. He was already up and walking towards her. He reached out and stroked her long hair. Do you want some water? She looked at him, a little stunned. She had loved him for a very, very long time. She had also hated him. She had also thought about never being with him again. But she never thought that one day, he would treat her so well. Qin Anlan looked at her deeply and pinched her face. Silly. Do you want me to be President Qin after we get married? If that was the case, why did they need to get married? He would never get married just because he had another child. If he married her, it must be because he loved her. If you love someone, shouldn't you treat that person well? Yi Liangqiu bit her lips and nodded. He walked out. She looked at his back and cupped her face in her hands. She couldn't believe that she could be loved like this. In the afternoon, Su Qing and Kaim came over. Kaim went to talk business with Qin Anlan, and Su Qing accompanied Yi Liangqiu. Su Qing knows the reason why Yi Liangqiu is taking care of the fetus. She spits, I know that Qin Anlan can't change his mind. He is a pervert. Yi Liangqiu coughed softly. It's not all his fault. If it wasn't for the fact that she couldn't control herself last night, he wouldn't have been like that. He was drunk, she wasn't. She still had a lingering fear in her heart. This child was very lucky. If he died because of last night's indulgence, she and Anlan would both feel uneasy. Looking at her, Su Qing felt that Sister Liangqiu was much prettier than before. In the past, she had a kind of masculine beauty. But now, just by sitting and lying down, she seemed to have a kind of weak beauty that made people want to dote on her. Perhaps every woman who was doted on would be like this. Su Qing suddenly said, I heard from Kaim that you have applied to the mental hospital to take her away. Is that right? This her was referring to Mrs. Su. Yi Liangqiu nodded. Yes, Anlan has already arranged for an overseas specialist. If she can't be cured, she may choose to live abroad. She couldn't be that cruel. If she didn't ask about it, she would feel uneasy. Chapter 1530. Yi Liangqiu's voice was calm. I've already submitted the paternity test, and with her family's influence, I don't think they'll hold on to someone who's no longer of any use. Su Qing pursed her lips and said cautiously, Sister Liangqiu, am I being too heartless? Yi Liangqiu smiled. It's all right. It was just that sleeping with Su Shiqing was a little too ruthless. She didn't realize that Su Cheng's expression was a little strange. She was thinking about her own matters and didn't say anything. After chatting for about an hour, Kaim and Qin Anlan also finished talking about work. Qin Anlan looked at him. What's your plan? He was asking about Su Qing. Kaim was stunned for a moment before he understood. He smiled faintly. Let nature take its course. He paused. I like her. Su Ching had many flaws, and her personality was even scary and surly, but Kaim wasn't afraid of her. On the contrary, Su Ching was a little afraid of him. Now that she was at home, she was no longer like a little princess who would take care of everything for him. Instead, she would take the initiative to do things for him. Although she was clumsy, it was better not to do it. She wouldn't willfully ask him to wake up in the middle of the night to make supper. When he watched TV, she would stay by his side obediently, either reading magazines or playing with her phone. When he went to smoke, she would even pass him an ashtray. He felt that he wasn't raising a woman, but a pet. She was so obedient that she didn't seem like the murderous Su Ching, so scary. She was purposely trying to please him, but it made his heart ache a little. Was she acting like this because she was afraid that he wouldn't want her anymore? However, Kaim still didn't know Su Ching well. A little girl's mind was far more complicated than he could imagine. Qin Anlin looked at Kaim and handed him a cigarette. Do you plan to marry her? Kaim took it and took a long puff. No objections. Qin Anlin actually wanted to ask him if he had thought it through. Su Ching was fine with other things, but as a man, the most difficult thing to overcome was a woman's past. It didn't matter who Su Ching slept with, but did Kaim really not care about Su Shiqing? He knew that Kaim's family was traditional and conservative. If Kaim were to marry a woman with a bad record, his family might not agree. Qin Anlin couldn't bring himself to ask, so Kaim had to decide for himself. After smoking a cigarette, he didn't ask them to stay for dinner and asked them to leave. Kaim drove with Su Ching sitting beside him. Su Ching tilted her head to look at him. What did you say to Anlin Gu? Kaim finished the cigarette in his hand, put it out, and said indifferently, it's just some work. As he spoke, he stroked Su Chang's long hair. She liked long, curly brown hair, but recently, she dyed it back to black and straightened it. It was very smooth, making her look much younger, and her eyes were clear. He thought that he liked it. Su Chang had always thought that Kaim was a pushover. She had interacted with him often, but in private, she felt that he wasn't that easy to deal with. On the contrary, he was a little chauvinistic and overbearing. Fortunately, he doted on her in private. Oh, she replied and didn't ask any more. Kaim started the car, holding the steering wheel with one hand and squeezing her hand with the other. He said softly, what do you want to eat tonight? Su Ching bit her lip. I want to eat spaghetti. Can you make it for me? Kaim nodded. But it won't be very delicious. Then make it a few more times. Su Cheng's voice was crisp. Kaim looked at her and smiled. All right, I'll make it a few more times. His words had a double meaning, and Su Ching took a long time to understand. She couldn't help but glance at him, her eyes full of emotions. Chapter 1531. Kaim brought her to buy the ingredients and they cooked together in the kitchen. He made noodles according to the recipe, and she sat on the counter, biting her little finger in her mouth. One moment, she was telling him that this wasn't right, and the next moment, she was telling him to do it that way. Kaim suddenly turned off the fire and looked at her. You do it then. Su Ching didn't say anything. She waved her hand disinterestedly. You do it. Kaim was still looking at her. Then, he walked over and stood in the middle of her body. He kissed her on the lips. Go do it, She looked at him in a daze. She was a little seduced. He hugged her with one hand and placed her in front of him. Kaim lit the fire again and held her hand to teach her how to do it. Su Cheng was quite serious at first. But soon, his hot lips pressed against the back of her ear. She said in a trembling voice, Kaim. Call me Shuheng. Kaim wrapped his arms around her slender waist and pressed his face against her neck. Su Ching bit her lip and turned her head to kiss the corner of his mouth. She smiled as she kissed him. Should I be called Yi Ping then? She couldn't help but complain, what a lame name. Don't tell me your surname is He. She then turned to look at his expression. Kaim looked like he was constipated. And so, Su Ching giggled. He really was called He Shuheng. Ha, she was dying of laughter. As Su Ching laughed, her eyes became a little hot. She really liked him. She liked being with him because he never looked at her with fear. She was Su Ching, a new Su Ching. She wasn't that murderous lunatic. When he loved her, he almost worshipped her, making her feel like she was clean. Su Ching sighed inwardly. She turned her head to kiss him. As Kaim kissed her, he held her waist with one hand and succeeded in 2 moves. He leaned on her shoulder and began to kiss her while biting her thin shoulder. Who are you calling lame? Young men and women were all indulgent. As soon as they touched each other's bodies, they couldn't wait to stay in bed for the whole day. Kaim had seen many female celebrities in the past, so he didn't think much of them. However, at this moment, he couldn't let go. Su Ching wasn't the prettiest, but she was the most shameless. Moreover, when she went crazy, it was like poison to men. Kaim didn't let her go. She came at her fiercely, and they tangled together. In the narrow space, it was filled with the sound of warm panting. The sound of men and women's love made people blush. Just as he was enjoying himself to his heart's content, the door to the apartment opened, and a clear female voice rang out. Mom is here. The voice stopped abruptly, probably because it had heard something unusual in the kitchen. The one who was panting heavily was her son. Kaim's mother, Mrs. He, stared blankly at the couple in the kitchen. The man was the son she had always been proud of, while the woman's hair was disheveled, and her t-shirt had been pulled down to her waist. Anne. She couldn't stand it anymore. She turned her head and said harshly, "Put on your clothes first." Mrs. He was a conservative woman. She had been widowed at a young age, and she had raised her son with great effort. Now, he had an annual salary of 10 million. In her family, everyone said that her son was outstanding. This time, she was here for his marriage. She wanted him to go home for a blind date. Several dutiful female teachers and doctors were waiting in line. Chapter 1532. Mrs. He was furious. In her heart, only a perverted woman would do such a thing with a man outside the room, and in such a wild position. She had never liked Su Ching from the start. Mrs. He went to the guest room, which was considered giving them face. Su Ching gritted her teeth. What should we do? She had already turned around and was lying on his chest, while Kaim was dressing her. She bit him, punched and kicked him, but it was all in a low voice. Why didn't you say anything when your mother came? Kaim sighed inwardly. I didn't know she was coming either. If he had known, he wouldn't have been so rash. In his heart, he acknowledged Su Ching. And he knew his mother's character even more, but he didn't say too much to Su Ching. Otherwise, her thoughts would probably run wild. After dressing her, he washed his hands and kissed her. Let's go out. We have to see her eventually. It's not good to stay here. Su Ching gritted her teeth and glared at him. It's all your fault. Kaim coaxed her. Okay, it's all my fault. The two of them went out together. Su Ching secretly tugged at his sleeve to give herself some courage. She was used to being thick-skinned, but today, she really didn't have the same imposing manner as before. Perhaps she cared too much, so she was afraid. In the past, she would definitely think that it was just an old woman. What was there to be afraid of? If she dared to talk nonsense with her, she would definitely kill her. But this was Kaim's mother, so she didn't dare to be rash. She even wanted to leave a good impression on her. Although Su Cheng was the daughter of a rich family, she was also very good at flattering people. She had coaxed Mrs. Su well in the past. She ran over to pour some tea and brought it to Mrs. He. "Auntie, have some tea." Mrs. He sat and glanced at her, but didn't take it immediately. Instead, she sized up Su Cheng's attire. She wore a cute white shirt and hot pants, so short that half her butt was exposed. To Mrs. He, such a bold outfit was like drowning in a pig cage. Her gaze was a little sharp as she asked indifferently, "Are you Shu Heng's friend?" She left out the word woman. Su Cheng nodded and emphasized, "I'm his girlfriend." Mrs. He pursed her lips and continued, "Shu Heng is warm-hearted and likes to help others. However, there's a downside to this. It's easy to attract shady people." Now that he said it like that, it didn't sound good. Kaim couldn't help but say, "Mom. Her name is Su Cheng. She is not a shady person. She is my girlfriend." Mrs. He glanced at her son, smiled faintly, and took Su Cheng's cup. Su Cheng breathed a sigh of relief and couldn't help but smile at Kaim. Mrs. He took the cup, but there was no tea. Instead, she placed it on the table. "Let me ask you, how long have you been dating?" Kaim coughed. "It's been a few months." He had lied to his mother. If he had said that they had only been together for a month, it wouldn't have been good for Su Cheng. But even so, Mrs. He laughed coldly. "You can do this kind of thing in a few months. You can live together, and you're still in the kitchen." Su Cheng blushed and lowered her head. If it had been in the past, she would have jumped out and left. Actually, she thought that if she jumped out and turned against him now, it might be a good thing for both Kaim and herself. But she couldn't bear to. She still wanted to be with him. Chapter 1533. Kaim's expression turned cold. He knew his mother well and knew that she would never agree to Su Cheng, so he said in a low voice, "I forced her." "Fine, you forced her. Then, can you let the girl go now?" Mrs. He's voice was cold as she looked at her son with disappointment. Of all the people he could be with, he chose to be with a female delinquent. If this girl was a decent person, would she be willing to do something like that with a man in the kitchen? She was the first to disagree with him. She could tell that he was restless and unsteady. Mrs. He was a retired middle school teacher, so her preferred occupation was that of a teacher, doctor, or nurse. Those were proper occupations. Kaim couldn't help but sigh. "Cheng Cheng likes me too. Mom, I want to be with her." Su Cheng felt touched. She had heard from Liangqiu about Kaim's family situation. For him to treat her like this, she was already very touched. Mrs. He's gaze returned to Su Cheng. She looked at her from left to right and found nothing pleasing to the eye. However, since her son had put it this way, she didn't want to clash head-on with him. So, she picked up her tea and took a sip. Then, she asked calmly, "Who are the people at home? I'll meet them later so that I won't be rude." Su Cheng looked at Kaim. What should she do? Could she say that she was Su Shicheng's daughter and that she was homeless? Kaim placed his hand on her shoulder and gently squeezed it before saying, "Cheng Cheng has an older sister. We'll bring Mom with us tomorrow, but she's pregnant and her condition isn't too good." Mrs. He's gaze sharpened again. "You don't have parents?" Su Cheng pursed her lips. After a long time, she said, Mom and Dad passed away a long time ago." She was talking about her biological parents, so it wasn't a lie. However, her heart was still thumping and she felt a little guilty. Mrs. He didn't ask any more questions. She was just unhappy in her heart. She coughed lightly and looked at her son. "Aren't you going to cook? Hurry up and go, I haven't had dinner yet. Kime patted the back of Su Cheng's hand. Stay with Mom. Mrs. He watched him enter the kitchen before turning to Su Cheng. Why are you always standing there? Sit down and talk. Su Cheng sat beside her like a little wife. She picked up the teacup and said respectfully, Auntie must have had a hard time traveling all the way here. Have some more tea. Mrs. He glanced at her. She really knew how to please the elders. She couldn't tell. However, she had taught tens of thousands of students. Her little trick would not be able to gain her approval. Children nowadays were very bad. They said one thing, but behind her back, they said another. She would not easily soften her heart. Mrs. He took a sip of tea. What do you do? Su Cheng said cautiously, an actress. Mrs. He put down the tea, her eyes shining. Do you sing or act? They're acting. Su Cheng's voice became softer. Mrs. He made an "oh" sound and said lightly, what works do you have? What works did Su Cheng have? Her work was herself, she couldn't answer Mrs. He's question. She looked towards the kitchen, hoping that Kime would come out to help. How could her little skill escape Mrs. He's gaze, so she laughed coldly. This was an unreliable girl. She probably saw Shu Hing's status and came up to him. Chapter 1534. Kime finally came out. He was carrying a large basin of something that looked like some kind of paste. Nobody knew what it was. Su Cheng stared at it for a long time, her voice a little coquettish. What is this? Before Kime could answer, Mrs. He answered on his behalf, this is the noodles we eat every day in our hometown. Miss Su probably isn't used to it, is she? Su Cheng knew very well that Mrs. He was indirectly rejecting her as the He family's daughter-in-law. If she could be dismissed so easily, she wouldn't be Su Cheng. Su Cheng said sweetly, it looks delicious. As she spoke, she ran over to get 3 bowls and prepared to fill them. But Mrs. He said, that's not how you eat it. Su Cheng was stunned and looked up. How do you eat it then? Eat it with your hands. Mrs. He's voice was still a little ungentle, and even her smile was a little stiff. She said lightly, use a spoon to dig it up. There's no need for a separate bowl. We're eating as a family. There's no need to separate, she said calmly, as if it was a matter of course. It wasn't that she was making things difficult for Su Cheng, but in Mrs. He's hometown, it had been like this for generations. It had long been ingrained. If Su Cheng refused, it would seem out of place. Of course, Su Cheng felt bad when she said that. She pinched Kime's sleeve with her little hand and whispered, how dirty is that? What did you say? Mrs. He's tone was stern, and her gaze fell on Su Cheng's face. Su Cheng jumped in fright and immediately waved her hand. No, nothing, then let's eat. Mrs. He didn't make things difficult for her. She picked up a spoon and began to eat the noodles. Kime pulled Su Cheng along. Su Cheng watched as he ate his noodles naturally. She wanted to learn from him as well, but she looked at the sticky mess. Everyone had to scoop a spoonful of it, and no one shared it. How dirty was that? In the end, Su Cheng couldn't hold it in any longer. She used a spoon to dig an untouched spot, got a small bowl for herself, and ate it in small bites. It was really disgusting. There was no taste at all. It was an indescribable taste in the mouth. She wanted to throw it up, but she didn't dare. She felt wronged in her heart. Her spaghetti had turned into batter, and in front of her sat a yiksha-like woman. She was fierce and did not look like a woman at all. Su Cheng pursed her lips and secretly glanced at Mrs. He. Her little hand secretly pinched Kime's sleeve again. Could she not eat? Kime naturally knew that she didn't like it, so he put down the spoon in his hand. "I'll make you spaghetti." Su Ching replied with an "oh," and then peeked at Mrs. He in an especially shameless manner. Mrs. He didn't say anything. When Kime went to the kitchen, Su Ching stood up with him. Her face was a little red. "I'll go help." Kime originally wanted her to accompany his mother and gain some favor, but looking at her, he couldn't bear to see her like that. He patted her and said, "What can you do to help? You're just causing trouble." Mrs. He smiled faintly. It's good for her to learn a little. So Su Ching skipped into the kitchen with him happily. Once they left, her whole body relaxed. She hugged his arm. "Your mother doesn't like me." Kime smiled. "It's fine as long as I like you." He paused and tilted his head with a smile. "Bear with it. We won't live with her in the future. At most, we'll live in the same neighborhood." Chapter 1535. "Oh," Su Ching replied. Remembering that she would have to face the fierce Mrs. He later, she whimpered and laid her face on Kime's arm. Pouting, she said, "Kime, kiss me, or I won't have the courage later." Kime kissed her on the lips, his gaze deep. "Do you have the courage now?" Su Cheng was still leaning on him. "Kiss me again." How could he stand her clinging to him like this? Ignoring the noodles in the pot, he held her face and kissed her deeply. Their lips and tongues intertwined, and it was indescribably touching. Then, it was burnt. By the time Kime came back to his senses, Mrs. He had already walked over. "Why is there a burnt smell?" Then she saw her outstanding son and Su Ching hugging each other, with a strand of silver on their lips. What else did Mrs. He not understand? Her expression was not good. She walked out without saying a word. Su Ching looked up at Kime. She was dumbfounded and asked in a daze, "Will your mom hate me even more?" Kime coughed lightly. "No. She will only think that I'm disappointing and can't bring honor to the He family." Su Ching bit her lip, her slender fingers gently poking his chest. She said softly, "Kime, you're already very amazing." To be able to climb to the top of King Entertainment was already something that many people could not achieve, not to mention that he was only in his 30s. Kime looked at her with a burning gaze. There was a spark in his eyes that she could not understand. "Really?" Su Ching nodded vigorously. "Really, you're really amazing." He felt a little warm inside. After all, Su Ching had grown up in the Su family and was used to enjoying life. She lived such a simple life with him, but she looked at him with such admiration and said that he was amazing. As a man, he was fully satisfied. But he smiled. "Then tonight, I'll let you know how amazing I am." He was so shameless that Su Ching felt uncomfortable. She said in a low voice, "Your mom is here. Don't mess around tonight." She thought about it and said, "I'd better go." After saying that, her heart became desolate again. She left. Where could she go? She didn't have a home anymore. She only had Kime, and she had shamelessly stuck to it. Su Cheng's lips trembled slightly, unable to speak for a long time. Kime sighed softly and patted her on the back. "Don't let your imagination run wild." "Where are you going?" "You're not going anywhere. You're just going to stay here like a good boy." Su Cheng's eyes became misty as she suddenly hugged Kime. Honestly, she had only wanted to have fun at first. It didn't matter if she had slept with another man. She had originally wanted to go to bed with him, eat and drink, as if it was a vacation. But unknowingly, both of them had become serious. Su Ching felt that she was very bad. She didn't want to be like this. She wanted to give him a stable life. She did not deserve it. But she couldn't bear to. What should she do? She was suddenly afraid, she hugged Kime like this, full of dependence. Even her body was trembling slightly. She was even more afraid that if she wanted to settle down, her past wouldn't allow her to be with Kime. Would his mother be able to accept such a misbehaving daughter-in-law? Even if she ate 2 bowls of batter for a meal, it would be useless. Kime could feel her fear. His heart was a little heavy, but he comforted her. "All right, don't be afraid. She won't know if I don't say anything." Chapter 1536. Su Qing didn't say anything. She just buried her face in Kime's neck. Later, she didn't ask for spaghetti. Instead, she ate the batter with them. With an ingratiating smile on her face, Su Qing ate the noodles one mouthful at a time without changing her expression. "Is it delicious?" Mrs. He looked satisfied. "Eat more if it's delicious." Su Qing felt like her stomach was filled with batter. She felt like it was going to explode. She rubbed her stomach and said, "I'm full." Kime looked at her with heartache. "Are you bloated? If you're bloated, go back and lie down for a while." However, Su Qing insisted that she would clean up after they finished eating. Mrs. He looked at Su Qing with a gentle look in her eyes. This girl looked gorgeous, but she was hardworking and willing to learn. Actually, it didn't matter if she did well or not. The key was that she could tell that she still cared about Shuheng. That was the most important thing. Mrs. He didn't have high requirements. She just wanted her to be well-educated and polite. However, her good impression of her was soon destroyed. When Su Qing was cleaning up, she accidentally buckled the basin on the carpet. The carpet was worth tens of thousands of yuan. This was unforgivable to Mrs. He. Kime quietly helped her clean up. "All right, go and play. Stop causing trouble for me." Su Qing pouted, but she still followed him to the kitchen. Mrs. He shook her head. How could such a rich young lady take good care of Shuheng? She strongly objected again. However, she wouldn't say it out loud. She wanted the girl to back off. After Kime cleaned up everything, he sat and chatted with his mother for a long time. Su Qing accompanied him. She was a little listless. She really wasn't interested in what they were talking about. After a long time, she was a little sleepy. She hugged Kime in a daze and said in a soft voice, "Kime, I want to sleep." Kime turned his head and looked at her sleepy face. His heart softened. He turned to his mother and said, "I'll carry her back to the room. I'll come out later." Mrs. He forced a smile. "She's already so big. Does she still need you to carry her? How was this a girlfriend? She was clearly a giant baby." Mrs. He thought about it calmly. "Carry her in first. We'll talk later." Kime nodded. "All right." He probably knew what his mother was thinking. His expression was serious, but he never wavered. He reached out and carried Su Qing to the bedroom. She was in a daze, but she still remembered what happened in the kitchen. She licked the corner of his lips and murmured, "You're amazing." Although Kime was a little moved, she still remembered that her mother was outside, so she only kissed her for a while before withdrawing. Lowering his eyes to look at her, he actually felt a little emotional. He was born in an ordinary family, and he had endured a lot to climb to where he was today. He had even endured what ordinary people couldn't. If he could maintain his rationality, he would not have chosen to be with Su Qing. He didn't love her that much. He just liked to be with her and to see her coquettish appearance. As he liked her so much, he couldn't let her go. He even had to go against his mother's wishes. With a bitter laugh, he tucked her in and walked out of the room. Outside, Mrs. He was sitting and drinking tea without much of an expression on her face. Kime went over and sat opposite her. He smiled faintly. Mom, I know you don't like Ching Ching, but I do. He went straight to the point. Since he could make Su Ching endure, he could also make his mother take a step back. Chapter 1537. Mrs. He looked at her son and smiled faintly. What do you like about her? Before Kaim could speak, she continued, do you like her beautiful appearance? Or her precious character? She had always been serious and Kaim was used to it. After a long while, he said, Mom, it's not like that. No. Mrs. He sneered. Then what do you like about her? Do you like her coquettish ways? Kaim couldn't communicate with her. His mother had never been so harsh to someone before. He knew how deep love was. But he was already an adult and he knew what he was doing. Su Ching might not be perfect, but in his heart, she was one of a kind. Mom, Su Ching might not be your ideal daughter-in-law, but she's trying very hard to please you. Kaim took a step back. Besides, we haven't talked about marriage yet. You can spend some time with her before that. Mrs. He hit the nail on the head. What if I can't get along with her? Kaim smiled faintly and walked over to his mother. He placed his hands on her shoulders and said, Mom, you have a way to deal with even the most mischievous student. Just treat Su Ching as your student. You can deal with her however you want. I have no objections. He sounded very generous, but as a mother, how could she not understand her son? She sighed and said, Shuheng, you weren't like this before. Kaim fell silent. Yes, he had been like this before. If he had been like this before, perhaps he and Ning Jia wouldn't have missed out. His mother might have accepted Ning Jia as compared to Su Ching, but he still got together with Su Ching without hesitation. After a while, he said, Mom, the most important thing for me in the past was to work hard and not let others look down on me. I wanted you to live the best life possible. I did it. Now, I want to be happy. He looked at his mother and said, Mom, can you let me choose the happiness I want for myself? His eyes were full of begging. And this was the first time he was begging her. Mrs. He felt very upset. After a long while, she sighed and said, Shuheng, you're making things difficult for me. Lowering his eyes, Kaim said, Mom, I'll only make things difficult for you once in my life. Mrs. He closed her eyes. Mom can't tell what's so good about her. Kaim smiled bitterly. I don't know either. Mrs. He still loved her son dearly. She reached out to touch his head. Only then did she realize that it had been a long time since she had been so close to her son. She sighed. Bring her back home for the new year. Still worried, she added, remember to dress plainly. She was a person who cared about her reputation. She was afraid that her neighbors and old colleagues would gossip and say that Shuheng had brought an improper woman home. Even so, Mrs. He still decided to stay for a few more days. I haven't agreed yet. I have to see this little girl more. For Kaim, this result was enough to make him happy. He thanked his mother from the bottom of his heart. Mrs. He felt a little sad when she heard that. The child had grown up and had his own ideas. After spending so much time in the outside world, he also liked pretty girls. Kaim stayed with his mother for a long time and waited for her to go to bed before he went back to his room. Su Cheng was sleeping soundly. He sat by the bed and watched her for a long time before he went to take a shower. Chapter 1538. Su Ching opened her eyes and looked at him in a daze. Where's your mom? She's asleep, he replied mildly. He seemed a little distracted. Su Ching lay in his arms and said in a soft voice, I'm going to sleep too. Otherwise, I won't be able to serve your mom tomorrow. Kaim's heart skipped a beat. He had seen many girls who knew how to act coquettishly and say sweet things to their boyfriends. But now he had heard the most touching words of love in the world. She said that she wanted to serve his mom. It wasn't that Kaim wanted her to please his mother, but he felt an indescribable sense of satisfaction that she was willing to do this for him. He covered her with his body and kissed her passionately. Su Ching woke up. She blinked and looked at the man who was kissing her passionately. She wanted to resist, but he raised her hands high and held them above her head, then he got his way. He was so strong that she was afraid. Droplets of hot sweat dripped down and branded on her white and tender skin. It was so scalding that she almost screamed, "Kaim." She called out his name in a trembling voice, but he continued to hold her, his gaze deep. "Call me Shuheng." She laughed softly, a little out of character. Kaim was a little annoyed and pressed her down. Soon, both of them couldn't take it anymore. He hugged her and trembled slightly. His hot lips moved closer to her ear and he murmured, "Do you love me?" Su Ching felt a white light in front of her and she fainted. Kaim looked at her blushing face. He reached out to brush aside her long, sweaty hair and carried her to the shower. When they returned to bed, he couldn't fall asleep and looked at her for a long time. He wasn't a person who made decisions easily. Since he had decided to be with her, they would be together for real. It might not be that simple, but he hoped that she would persevere. Early in the morning, Su Ching woke up and found herself in Kaim's arms. She rubbed her eyes. "When did I fall asleep?" Kaim's voice was faint. "I fell asleep while we were talking." Her eyes widened. "Why didn't you wake me up then?" Oh no, his mother must dislike her even more. Su Ching was so angry that she bit his neck and punched and kicked him, but how could her kung fu be enough? Kaim held her hand easily and pulled it to his body. "Are you still going to be fierce?" He usually looked gentle, but he was extremely strong. Su Ching couldn't use any strength when she was lying down, so she could only scold him harshly. Kaim didn't get angry. Instead, he twisted her and tortured her in a way that made people's hair stand on end. Just as they were enjoying themselves, the bedroom door opened, then, the door to Mother He's new world opened. She had never known that there was a kind of love that could do this. What's more, it was her precious son who did it. She immediately closed the door. Her face was burning. After a while, she controlled her voice and said, "Breakfast is ready. Get up and eat." Su Ching turned around and buried her face in Kaim's arms. She whined, "Kaim, it's only 6 o'clock. Are you sure you want to get up and eat breakfast at this time?" She usually slept until 10 o'clock. Getting her up at 6 o'clock was killing her. After she said that, she nibbled on Kaim's neck and rubbed her body against his. Kaim was on fire from her arousal. But he was worried about his mother outside, so he grabbed her slender arm and played with her. Chapter 1539. It was already 7:30 when they went out for breakfast. Mother He's face was a little long, and she said unhappily, "Even if you're young, you have to control yourself." She looked at her son sternly. Kaim smiled. "Got it, Mom." Su Ching thought indignantly in her heart. He was obviously one thing with his words, but his actions were another. He was the one who was lustful, but he always had a way to say that she wanted it. What did she want? She liked women the most. She wouldn't admit that she liked his body, and she wouldn't admit that she liked to do it with him. Su Ching thought about it and looked at the breakfast. It was much more pleasing to the eye. Although it was green vegetables and porridge, it was at least something for humans to eat. So Su Ching smiled sweetly at Mrs. He. "Thank you, Auntie." "Mother," he said calmly, "you have to wake up earlier in the future. Young people should wake up earlier. It's good for your health to exercise." Su Chin said in a small voice, I exercise. Mother, he froze for a moment. Exercise in bed. But she was a teacher after all, so she couldn't say such vulgar words. Kaim took another look at Su Ching. The little girl had grown up. She dared to talk back. He wanted them to get along well, so he left Su Ching behind to accompany his mother when he went to work. When Su Ching sent him off, her eyes were brimming with tears. She was just short of hugging his thigh. Kaim was always in a good mood when he went to work. He also believed that Su Ching had a sense of propriety and wouldn't act rashly. Su Ching was indeed so. She turned around carefully and looked at Mother He. She squeezed out a bright smile and said, Auntie, shall I take you shopping? Sure. Mother He also smiled. I happen to have a lot of things I want to buy too. At the mention of shopping, Su Cheng's eyes lit up. This was her strength, so she smiled even sweeter. Then I'll go change and go out. Mother He nodded and watched as Su Ching went back to the bedroom. After a while, she came out in a light yellow dress. She had to admit that this little girl was really beautiful. Her whole body was tender, and she couldn't blame her son for thinking about doing that all day long. When they arrived at the underground car park, Su Ching opened the door of a white Porsche and gestured for Mama He to get in. Mama He hesitated for a moment. This is Shuhing's car. Su Ching smiled. No, this is my car. She got into the car and waited for Mama He to get in before starting the car slowly. She had always been a fast driver, but today, she restrained herself out of consideration for Mama He, but even so, her speed was still unusual on the street. He's mother began to panic, but she didn't want to be treated as a bumpkin, so she grabbed the armrest. But after a while, her complexion changed and became ashen. However, she still resisted the urge to vomit and turned her head to look at Su Ching. Driving to 80 on the street, Su Ching was still able to sing a pop song at the same time. Mother He didn't know what song it was, but it was a love song. He's mother was about to vomit. She was really about to vomit. Her voice was also suppressed. Stop the car, stop the car. Su Ching was shocked and stopped the car by the side of the road. He's mother had already rushed out of the car and squatted by the side of the road to vomit. Su Ching was stunned. She squatted beside his mother and asked softly, Auntie, are you carsick? She carefully handed her a tissue. His mother finished vomiting and gritted her teeth. I don't get carsick. Chapter 1540. Mother He was afraid of vomiting and didn't want to sit in her car anymore. She pointed to the supermarket in front and said, I'll walk there. You park the car at the entrance and wait for me. Su Ching nodded and obeyed. She got into the car and dialed Kaim's number. The call was quickly answered. How is it? My mom is easy to get along with, right? She vomited. Su Ching whispered. Is your mom pregnant? Pregnant? Kaim didn't know whether to laugh or cry. My dad has been dead for almost 20 years. Do you think my mom is pregnant? Su Cheng's eyes widened. What if it's old Wang's? Ching Cheng. Kaim's voice was stern. Don't say that. Su Ching knew she was in the wrong. She groaned and hung her head dejectedly. All right, I just said it casually. I didn't mean it. How could Kaim not know her? Driving was like shooting a rocket. She didn't think they would go out, so she said, drive slowly. My mom won't vomit. I'm driving very slowly. Su Ching protested in a small voice. However, when she heard that the other side was silent, she reflected on it and didn't say anything. After hanging up the phone, she parked the car and waited for Mother He at the entrance. She even bought a bottle of water for Mother He. Her thoughtfulness probably made Mother He feel good about her. The way she looked at her was much kinder. However, what made Su Ching a little uncomfortable was that Mother He took her to the supermarket instead of shopping for luxury goods. The seafood and vegetables looked so scary to her. She bit her lip and tiptoed behind Mother He. Her face was pale. "Auntie, let's go to the mall next door." Mother He glanced at her. "Why? You don't like it here?" "I like it." Su Cheng's face was bitter. She followed Mother He to buy chicken, duck, and fish. She felt dizzy and wanted to vomit, but she endured it. What surprised her the most was that when they paid the bill, Mother He took out 2 big boxes. T asked her, "What's Shuheng's number?" "What number?" Su Cheng looked at the thing in her hand, a little confused. Mother He repeated again, "Measurements. Don't you have any protection?" Her voice was not soft, because in addition to teaching mathematics, Mrs. He also taught biology, so she did not feel that there was anything shameful about this kind of thing, but she was more conservative in the way she did it. Everyone was looking at them. Even though Su Ching had a thick expression on her face, she couldn't stand it. She said in a low voice, "Take a dump." Mama He was satisfied. Her son had to be a large size. So she put down the medium size and took the large one instead. He even chose the ultra-thin and ultra-sensitive type. Su Ching wanted to take a dump. Later, when Mother He went to the bathroom, she secretly sent a message to Kaim. "Do you know what your mom bought for you?" Kaim looked at the text on the phone and smiled. "What?" 2 big boxes of Su Ching coughed up blood, super thin, super sensitive, super large. Feels great, doesn't it? Kaim looked at the words and could imagine her expression. She was in a good mood. "Then try it tonight." Su Ching was actually a little sad. She understood that Mother He bought this because she didn't approve of her. She was afraid that they would kill her, and she couldn't return it even if she wanted to. She thought that if she wasn't so notorious now, she could tell Mother He that she and Kaim wanted a child today, but she was powerless in front of Mother He's strength. Chapter 1541. On the way back, Mama He took Su Cheng's car again. This time, Su Cheng drove very slowly. When they returned to Kaim's apartment, Mama He started to get busy. She cleaned up and washed all the blankets and sofas. Su Ching followed behind. She didn't know how to do things, so she whispered, "You can hire someone to do this." Mama He smiled faintly. "There are idlers in the house. Why waste money?" Su Ching pursed her lips and didn't say anything because she was that idler. But she didn't know how to do it, so she could only follow suit. Her attitude was good, and Mama He was satisfied. After washing up for the whole morning, Su Cheng's back was sore. At noon, they even cleaned up the food they had bought. Mama Su was efficient. When dealing with the small animal carcasses, she didn't show any mercy. She was as inhumane as a doctor dissecting. Su Ching thought secretly and sent it to Kaim. In response, Kaim only smiled. Su Ching really thought of herself as a little girl now. She was no longer that fierce person. That was good. She was delicate, and he was willing to indulge her. Mama Su looked at Su Ching and said, "Make a simple sansien noodles. We'll make do with it for lunch." Su Ching knew that Mama Su respected men. When the man wasn't at home, the woman didn't need to eat much. She just had to make do with it. She was so tired and hungry. She wanted to eat a good meal, so she suggested, "Auntie, can I order a few dishes? Do you want to eat something good?" Mama He looked at her. Su Cheng's face was a little hot, and she felt embarrassed. After a while, she thickened her face and said, "I just don't think it's good for you to come all the way here to eat noodles." "That's good. You can make a few more dishes for me. Mama, he said pleasantly. According to Su Cheng's experience, the easier it was to talk to these old women, the worse they were. Su Cheng didn't say anything. How could she know how to make it? 3 fresh noodles, but even if it was the simplest, how could she know how to make it? Therefore, during the meal, 2 plates were broken, and 2 bowls were broken. What was served on the table was a pile of black paste. Mama, he looked at her deeply for a long time before she said something meaningful. You're better off being a female artist. Su Cheng twisted her fair fingers. Auntie, I will learn. Mama, he nodded. Okay, I'll teach you. She started making lunch, and Su Cheng just stood by her side and watched. After a while, Mother He's tone was indifferent. Oh right, I also bought a live chicken that I haven't dealt with yet. It's in the trunk of your car, right? Bring it over and I'll teach you how to kill it in the afternoon. Su Cheng was dumbfounded. Kill a chicken. He might as well kill her. At the end of the day, she felt as if her bones were going to fall apart. In the afternoon, she went to take a bath, while Mama He sat and watched TV in high spirits. Su Cheng sniffed herself and felt that she was full of the smell of chicken shit. She poured half a bottle of shower gel down her throat. When Kaim returned home, he felt that Su Cheng's little face seemed to have become a small V-shaped face. He took the opportunity to pinch her. My mom will leave after 3 days. At this moment, he was smoking on the balcony. Mama, he didn't like secondhand smoke, so she definitely wouldn't come. Su Cheng happily tiptoed forward and kissed his chin. Then after that, we can do whatever we want in the kitchen. Chapter 1542. Su Cheng was a little afraid. Her back was empty. If she wasn't careful, she would fall and shatter into pieces. She could only hug him tightly and whisper, "Don't let go." He paused for a moment, then buried his face in her neck and said in a low voice, "I won't, Ching Ching. I won't." She trembled and looked up at him. Was this his promise? Su Ching didn't dare to ask. At that moment, she just wanted to hug him and feel his warmth. At that moment, she felt like a woman. The two of them didn't dare to be too affectionate. After all, Mother He was still outside. She could still hear their movements. Kaim patted her. Go in, he lowered his voice. I'll hurt you later when we sleep. Sleeping time was the only time they could be alone. If his mother hadn't come over, he wouldn't have known that his desire was so strong that he didn't want to let it go for even a day. Su Cheng curled her lips, kissed his chin again, and ran out. When she left, her face was a little hot. When she sat next to Mother He, she brought a cup of hot tea and put a few wolfberries in it. Mother He glanced at her but didn't say anything. She picked up the tea and took 2 sips. Su Cheng said pitifully, Kaim said that you like to soak a few. I saw them at the supermarket today and bought them. Mother He glanced at her and said slowly, at least you're not too stupid. It wasn't a compliment, but Su Cheng's little face turned slightly red. Mother He was strict, but she wanted to be close to her. She even wanted to call her mother shamelessly. She knew that she was being greedy. She liked Kaim, and she also wanted to have a normal family. She hesitated. She had originally thought of it, but she overturned it. She thought that she was still selfish. The person she loved the most was herself. When Kaim loved her, she was also absent-minded and kept letting her imagination run wild. What are you thinking about? Kaim was sweating all over. He hugged her from behind and leaned against her, kissing her white and tender neck. As he kissed, he sucked on her ear, which was the most sensitive part of Su Cheng's body. Su Cheng snorted and gasped, I'm wondering if your mother will ever like me. Kaim chuckled. Then, he whipped her mercilessly. As she cried out, he flipped her over and kissed her carefully for a while before saying, "It's fine as long as I like it." Su Cheng looked up. Her long black hair was drenched in sweat and wrapped around his body. Her gaze was a little empty. She wanted this moment to last forever. She felt that she was in love with him, utterly in love. For the next 2 days, although she was still tormented by Himu and learned a lot of housework, she did not do as she wished. However, at night, it was sweet and passionate. And Himu's mother would also return to her hometown on Saturday afternoon. Kaim sent her to the airport. Su Cheng was originally going to go with them, but Himu's mother had something to say to Kaim, so Su Cheng did not follow. She drove to Qin Anlan's apartment. Qin Anlan still did not go to work. He was at home doing 20 or 40 filial piety. When he opened the door and saw Su Cheng, he smiled. "What's wrong? Don't you want to serve your future mother-in-law?" Su Cheng glanced at him. "Anlan Gu, you're also making fun of me." Qin Anlan closed the door. "How is this a joke? Don't you want to marry Kaim?" This time, Su Cheng did not reply because she wanted to. Chapter 1543. How could Qin Anlan not know what she was thinking about? He smiled faintly. Perhaps Liangqiu can't let it go, but she will get over it eventually. Su Cheng pursed her lips and did not say anything for a long time. She did not deserve to be forgiven, but so many people had forgiven her. She raised her head and adjusted her emotions before entering the master bedroom. Yi Liangqiu was reading a book. When Su Cheng entered, she closed the book and placed it on the bedside. "You're here." Su Cheng ran over and knelt in front of her carefully. "Are you feeling better now?" Yi Liangqiu smiled and caressed her lower abdomen. There was already a slight bulge. She looked up. "I'm fine now. It's Anlan who doesn't allow me to get out of bed. I feel that I'm going to get moldy if I lie down like this every day." Qin Anlan brought 2 glasses of milk over and handed one to Su Cheng. He then sat by the bed and served his wife. "Even if it gets moldy, your husband will lick it clean for you." Su Cheng covered her face, expressing that she could not bear to listen anymore. It was too shameful. Qin Anlan glanced at her. "You're making a fuss out of nothing. Didn't Kaim lick it for you?" Not only Su Cheng, even Yi Liangqiu could not bear to listen anymore. She stretched out her leg and kicked him gently. "Nonsense." Qin Anlan expressed that he was wronged. She did not allow him to touch her, but couldn't he just enjoy it with his mouth? However, he still gave in to the pregnant woman and spoke softly. "All right, be good. Drink it." That expression of his indicated that he was going to feed her mouth if she did not drink. Su Cheng stuck out her tongue. "Sister Liangqiu, you'd better drink it quickly. I'm still a child. I don't want to see such an unsightly scene." Yi Liangqiu took the glass and drank half of it slowly. Then, she said slowly, "Didn't you look in the mirror? Child. Would the child's neck be filled with strawberries?" Su Cheng let out a strange cry, her expression somewhat distorted. Qin Anlan smiled and drank the rest of the milk, leaving the space for the 2 women. After they left, Su Cheng let out a sigh of relief. "Sister Liangqiu, Kaim's mother is finally gone." Then, he gulped down a mouthful of saliva. When it came to killing chickens and ducks, when it came to mopping the floor, there was not even a speck of dust to be found. She must be a Virgo, Su Cheng concluded. Yi Liangqiu burst out laughing and punched the quilt. "She even bought t-shirts for you. That sounds very open-minded." Ha, she couldn't help but laugh again. Su Cheng's little expression was a mess of grievance. "You know, she really cares about her son, and she's super thin and super sensitive. Yi Liangqiu gave a faint smile and suddenly reached out to pat Su Cheng's head. Ching Ching, if you want to be happy, then be happy. How could she not know that within Su Cheng's words, there was a lot of probing going on? She wanted to be happy, but she didn't dare to. She had to get her consent first. Fool, Ching Ching, you don't owe me. You owe Xing Yuan. If you want to make it up to him, think about it carefully. Yi Liangqiu's tone turned serious. Back then, Xing Yuan cut the brakes, wanting to die together with you. However, you survived. She took a light breath and said with difficulty, then, you have to live well for him as well. Su Cheng was moved and her lips trembled. After a long time, she said, thank you, Sister Liangqiu. Yi Liangqiu lowered her eyes and said after a long time, the beginning of this match is not something we can choose. However, we can choose how it ends. Isn't that right, Ching Ching? Su Ching hugged Yi Liangqiu and she cried. She was so bad, so hateful. Could she still have happiness? Chapter 1544. Yi Liangqiu hugged Su Ching. Her heart felt heavy. Xing Yuan, it might be cruel for you to make such a decision. I might feel guilty for a long time, but I don't think I will regret it. She lowered her head and looked at Su Ching. You have to be good in the future. Su Ching was still hugging her, unwilling to let go. Yi Liangqiu patted her. All right, Anlin will be jealous again when he sees it. Su Ching bit her lip and let go. She glanced at her watch. It was already 4 o'clock. It was about time for Kaim to come and pick her up. Finally, his mother left. Su Ching thought that she could have a French meal tonight. Maybe she could watch a movie or something. She suddenly felt that life was beautiful. Her eyes were sparkling. She looked at Yi Liangqiu. Sister Liangqiu, thank you. Yi Liangqiu just smiled. However, none of them had expected that just as Mrs. He was about to leave, someone would maliciously spread some indecent photos of Su Ching on the internet. Those were probably photos of Su Ching when she was in her rebellious phase. In a hotel room, she was wearing a nurse's uniform. Her posture was indecent. Her long hair was drenched in sweat, and her expression was blurry. It was obvious that she had done it with a man. Unbeknownst to Su Ching, these photos had spread all over the internet when she was yearning for a better life. Qin Anlin saw it. Kaim, who was at the airport, saw it too. His expression was a little ugly. Someone had sent him a link. When he clicked on it, it was all Su Cheng's nude photos. He had long known about Su Cheng's past. It wasn't that he didn't care, but that he accepted it. But now that these photos had spread, especially at this time, it was extremely disadvantageous for Su Ching. At this moment, he could only send his mother away. Half an hour later, Kaim watched as the plane to City D took off. He got in the car and called Qin Anlin. President Qin, help me look after Su Ching. I'll be there in a while. Don't let her touch her phone. Qin Anlin said in a low voice, I see. After hanging up, he played with his phone for a while before making a few more calls. He wanted to use King Entertainment's power to suppress this matter, but the people were especially crazy about this kind of scandal. There was no way to suppress it. Moreover, Qin Anlin also knew in his heart that Su Shiqing was behind this. After remaining silent for so long, he finally made his move. Qin Anlin got up and walked into the master bedroom. Su Cheng was still talking and laughing. When she saw him, she called Anlin Gu sweetly. Hearing this made his nose sting. He felt sad for her. He knew that Su Ching had been trying to please Kaim's mother these days. In the past, she had been such an arrogant and willful person. She was willing to accommodate such an old-fashioned old lady for Kaim, even killing a chicken. But now, everything was ruined. He had seen Kaim's mother. There was no way she could accept these photos or Su Qing. Qin Anlin closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was already very relaxed. Su Qing, go and help Liangqiu get a glass of water. Su Qing looked at him strangely, but she still went obediently. As soon as she left, Qin Anlin took her bag and put her phone away. His movements were very quick. Yi Liangqiu didn't understand. Anlin, what are you doing with Su Cheng's phone? Qin Anlin said briefly, Su Shiqing got someone to put some indecent photos of Su Qing online. Sooner or later, Kaim's mother will know about this. Before that, let's send Su Qing abroad for a while. Chapter 1545. Yi Liangqiu was stunned. Indecent photos. Qin Anlin couldn't say much. He just reached out and patted her head. Don't worry, I'll help her. She felt uneasy, but she couldn't ask too many questions. However, they didn't know that Su Qing was a sensitive person. How could she not be suspicious? At that moment, Su Qing leaned against the door. She raised her head slightly and bit her lip. She knew those photos. They were taken when she was 19 years old and drunk. Su Shiqing was the one who dealt with it afterward. Great, her good father had a trick up his sleeve. Su Qing smiled faintly. Her smile was a little sad. She knew all too well what those photos meant. It meant that she was ruined. If it wasn't for Kaim, she wouldn't have cared. But now, she cared. Su Qing closed her eyes tightly, holding back the tears that were about to fall. When she returned to the bedroom, she held a glass of water with a sweet smile on her face. The water is here. Qin Anlin took it and fed it to Yi Liangqiu. Yi Liangqiu felt that this was the most difficult scene she had put on after so many years of acting. She looked at Su Qing. Her throat felt a little sore, and she couldn't say a word. They all knew about Kaim's situation. He couldn't disregard his mother's opinion. Su Qing was still laughing without a care in the world. Only she knew that her heart was bleeding. Those who made mistakes were destined to never find happiness. Kaim came quickly. He arrived in an hour. Qin Anlin made dinner and asked them to stay for dinner. After dinner, he called Kaim and said that he needed to talk business. Su Qing stuck to Yi Liangqiu. She pretended not to know. Kaim sat on the sofa in the study. Qin Anlin said calmly, Kaim, send her abroad. Everything will be over in 2 years. Moreover, Su Shiqing would definitely not only use these 2 moves. Presumably, Su Qing had a lot of information that Su Shiqing could use against her. Instead of being passive, it was better to leave. With a cigarette in his hand, Kaim looked at Qin Anlin quietly. After a long time, he took a deep drag and said, I'm going to send her to Canada. The weather there was cold, but it was suitable for her. Have you made up your mind? Qin Anlin put out the cigarette in his hand. If you have, I will arrange for her to be sent out immediately. Kaim, if you want, you can go with her. Kaim laughed bitterly. I can't leave. If he left, he wouldn't be able to explain it to his mother. Qin Anlin let out a long sigh. There's no way to suppress this matter. Kaim, I'm sorry. Kaim was a little moved. He knew that President Qin had tried his best. He pursed his lips and said, Thank you, President Qin, for everything you have done for me and Su Qing. Qin Anlin sighed in his heart. There was only a limit to what he could do. He could only let Su Qing live well in a foreign country. He couldn't help much else. The most important thing was to kill Su Shiqing. If it weren't for Liangqiu's feelings, he would have chosen to kill Su Shiqing directly. Because Lianqiu was there, he couldn't do it. Qin Anlin narrowed his eyes and made up his mind. Sometimes, too much worry would hurt more. However, he had never thought that the storm would come so soon. Kaim took Su Qing back to his apartment. He didn't speak much along the way because he had something on his mind. He put one hand on the steering wheel and held Su Cheng's hand with the other. Su Cheng looked at him and then lowered her eyes. Kaim, it's not safe to drive like this. Chapter 1546. That smile was very warm. At least, Su Cheng's heart was warmed. She pressed her face against his arm and smiled softly. There was a man who was still willing to love her after seeing her terrible past and was willing to be with her despite all the pressure. She felt that the pain of her past had been the best compensation. Her eyes were a little hot, and she said softly, Kaim, have I ever said that I love you? Kaim's body froze for a moment. Then, he slowly stopped the car and looked down at her. His voice was gentle. It's not too late to say it now. Really? Su Qing blinked away the tears in her eyes so that he wouldn't see it. Kaim reached out and rubbed her hair. He smiled and continued driving back to the apartment. At night, no one could sleep. He lay in bed and smoked, while Su Qing took a shower in the bathroom. She hadn't come out yet after an hour. He didn't rush her because he wasn't in the mood to do anything. He was very annoyed. How should he tell her? Or should he just knock her out and throw her on the plane? Just as he was feeling upset, Su Qing came out. She only had a white shirt on, which was his. Only 3 buttons were fastened, and the loose collar revealed her small and beautiful collarbone. The hem couldn't hide anything, and her slender legs challenged his self-control as she walked. Kaim reached out to put out the cigarette and said hoarsely, "Come here." Su Qing walked over slowly, climbed onto the bed, and moved to his side like a wild cat. She looked down at him, suddenly pulled out the tie on the bedside table, and held his hand. "Didn't you want to use that method?" She leaned down to his neck, bit him lightly, and then tied his hand. Kaim's gaze was deep as he stared at her in the dim light. She sat on him like a queen, pressed him down, and said with a hint of seduction, "Remember, you are a woman now." With a loud sound of pain, Kaim exploded. Su Cheng's boyfriend power was off the charts, and Kaim was as weak as a little girl. The whole process was painful, messy, and crazy. As for the details, the author didn't know either, and Kaim was quite embarrassing. However, this was just the beginning. Later, Su Cheng couldn't laugh anymore. Once a man's suppressed desire exploded, it was simply terrifying. In the second half of the night, she was pressed down again and again until she was exhausted. Both of them were exhausted, and they hugged each other and fell asleep without washing. However, Su Qing didn't fall asleep. When Kaim's breathing became even, she opened her eyes. She looked at him silently for a long time, and a helpless smile appeared on her lips. She had thought that she had been redeemed, but it wasn't. "Kaim, I have to go. I know how important your mother is to you, and I know that you will hurt her if you want to be with me. It was the first time I didn't want to hurt someone. I didn't like her. I still felt that she was old-fashioned and even annoying. But I didn't want to make things difficult for you. I didn't want to see her cry and get angry every day. It's my fault. I didn't send a healthy Su Qing to you. I don't deserve love in the first place." Su Qing hugged Kaim and buried her face in his chest. Just let her feel his warmth one last time. She looked at him longingly. After a long time, she got up and put on her clothes. She took his phone and drove away in her car. The night grew darker and darker. She cried as she drove. Chapter 1547. Su Qing drove the car into a hotel. There was a room that she had booked for a long period of time. She took the room card and entered. There was a computer and cell phone inside. She walked in and immediately closed the door. She picked up her cell phone and dialed a number. After hanging up the phone, there was a sound of someone kicking the door, but she had locked it from the inside. She turned on the computer and her slender fingers tapped lightly on the keyboard. After a while, a video was released. The male and female leads were her and Su Shiqing. She laughed softly. Did he want to destroy her? In that case, she would be more thorough. They would hurt each other. She had already given up everything. There was nothing she could not give up. Reputation and innocence. What right did Su Shiqing have to have those things that she did not have? Su Qing laughed. She laughed with tears in her eyes. The door was finally kicked open. 4 men in black came in. Of course, Su Shiqing was among them. When he saw the computer light up, his expression changed. You spread the news. His voice was cold, and he couldn't believe it. Wasn't she with that Kam recently? How could she dare to send out such a video? Yes. Su Qing stood up slowly and looked at Su Shiqing. Suddenly, a maniacal smile appeared on her face. Dad, we are even now. We are going to be rats crossing the street. Are you happy? She laughed, but her face was full of tears. Su Shiqing narrowed his eyes and gave her a tight slap. You're crazy. This lunatic. The lunatic that he had raised with his own hands had destroyed him. He had underestimated her. She was even more ruthless than he had imagined. Su Cheng's face was slapped to the side and she could not come back for a long time. There were 5 bright red handprints on her face. She could even see traces of blood. It was clear how much strength Su Shiqing had used. Yes, I'm crazy. She turned around and was still smiling. She laughed heartlessly. What about you? Aren't you crazy? She raised her hand almost crazily. Who forced my hands to be stained with blood? Who didn't give me a chance to live? Her voice was hysterical and close to screaming. You clearly know that I love him, but you still did it. I want to destroy you. Yes, I want to drag you down with me. Su Shiqing, you should have died long ago. Su Shiqing's face became colder. It seems that your existence in this world is unnecessary. He raised his hand and was about to instruct his men to kill Su Qing, but a row of police officers with guns stood at the door. Su Shiqing froze. Su Qing, on the other hand, giggled. She moved closer to his face and said in a very soft voice, like a complete lunatic, Dear Daddy, you didn't expect this, did you? Even if I die, I'll drag someone down with me. She chuckled. I'll slowly confess all the shady deals you've done behind my back. I'll become a tainted witness. Su Shiqing sneered, then, what about Lin Xingyuan? Do you think you can get away with killing him? The number of people you've killed is enough for you to die. His eyes were filled with hatred. He was determined to kill Su Qing, no matter what method he had to use. However, Su Qing was fearless. Even if I die, you can't escape. However, Su Qing didn't know that sometimes, fate wouldn't treat her badly. She looked death calmly in the eye, but in the end, fate played a kind joke on her again. Su Qing and Su Shiqing were taken away together. Su Qing was facing a criminal charge, while Su Shiqing was facing a financial case. He was soon bailed out by his lawyer. Some authors said that demons have bad morals and that bad people don't get punished. Now that Su Qing is going to jail, do you feel like crying? Chapter 1548. When Su Ching saw Kaim, it was 4:00 at night. In the dim light of the small room, Su Ching had already lost her youthfulness. She looked a little yellow and her hair had lost its luster. She and Kaim sat facing each other. Kaim's pupils contracted as he looked at her, and his lips were pursed tightly. He clenched his fists on the table and tried his best not to lose his temper at her. Su Ching kept her head down. He didn't speak for a long time. She looked up at him and said softly, "Actually, you don't have to come." He must have seen that video, and after that, he probably didn't want her anymore. She was such a bad girl. It would be good for him if she could distinguish between them in the future. Kaim looked at her and repeated her words coldly. "I don't have to come. Are you saying that I don't need to care about you anymore and that we should break up?" His voice was stern and Su Ching froze. She couldn't move or speak for a long time. Kaim looked at her with pain in his eyes. It was a pain that she couldn't understand. If she could understand, she wouldn't have done this. "Because I can't protect you. Because I can't give you confidence. Do you think you can make me give up with just a few photos?" There was a hint of desolation in his sternness. She knew that if she admitted to everything now, she could be sentenced to death for her crimes. And he couldn't do anything about it. No matter what she was like, no matter how much his mother disliked her and disagreed with their marriage, as long as she was alive, there would be hope. However, Su Ching ended everything. He looked at her with hatred in his eyes. She had given him such a dazzling joy, as beautiful as fireworks in the night, but in the end, she had ended everything with her own hands. "Su Ching, I've never hated someone so much." He looked at her. "If you come out alive, I promise I'll kill you." He said it fiercely, but his eyes were red. He couldn't save Su Ching because that idiot had told him everything she had done. He knew that she wanted to drag Su Shirching down with her and ruin his reputation. Su Shirching was so smart. At most, his reputation would be tarnished. Su Ching was suddenly at a loss. She looked at Kaim and twisted her fingers together. Her voice was very soft. "Kaim, I'm sorry. If there's a next life, He interrupted her before she could finish her sentence. Kaim's voice was bleak. "What do I want to do in my next life? I don't have it in this one." Su Ching looked at him, bit her lips, and her fingers almost dug into her flesh. It was time, but Kaim didn't leave. He looked at her. Only a few hours ago, they had been madly in love with each other's bodies, but now that she was in such a place, how could he walk away? He had exhausted all his connections just to see her. Su Ching cried and covered her face with her hands. "Kaim, what can I do? I can't escape. Not only can I escape Su Shirching, but I also can't escape my own conscience." Kaim smiled faintly. He looked at her for a while, but his heart softened. He held her hand and leaned forward. "Don't cry." Su Ching shook her head desperately. "I'm not afraid. I'm really not afraid. Kaim, it's just that I'm really going to lose you." She let go of his hand. Her eyes were red and swollen with tears, and her body was trembling slightly. Kaim's heart fell to the bottom. Chapter 1549. After a long while, he said, "You'd better live well. If you're alive, your surname will be He." Su Ching was stunned. Kaim looked at her deeply again before turning to leave. Su Ching sat there for a long time. She looked up, and the dim light stung her eyes. She covered her eyes and cried. She didn't regret it. She really didn't regret it. Kaim left and smoked a cigarette outside. He looked up and saw Chin Anlan's car. He was surprised, and his eyes felt a little hot. After standing for a while, Chin Anlin came out. He was dressed in black, and he was submerged in the night. How did you know something happened? Kaim's voice was a little hoarse. Chin Anlin handed him a cigarette and smoked one himself. He blew out a smoke ring and said, I couldn't sleep at night, so I looked through the news. It was all over the place. He paused for a moment. Liangqiu also knows about it. The Lin family said that they wanted to sue Su Qing to death. For Liangqiu, this matter was also a great blow. Lin Xingyuan's family had always trusted her, but after Su Qing turned herself in, Liangqiu's phone rang countless times, and every time, it was to scold her. In the end, he turned off her phone. Kaim looked up and sighed. She's so stupid. If he had known that his love would drag her down, he would have never started it. He hadn't been able to protect her. He felt guilty, but he couldn't tell her about it. If he did, she would feel even worse. Chin Anlin understood Kaim's feelings and patted him on the shoulder. I'll try my best. However, Chin Anlin knew that if it was just the case of Su Qing killing Lin Xingyuan, he would be able to get her out. However, this matter involved ATV, and even her and Su Shiqing's scandal, so everything would be even more difficult. He wasn't confident, and he didn't even know if he could save her life. Kaim also knew that, which was why he was in so much pain. He nodded. President Qin, you can go back first. Chin Anlin let out a long sigh. Be careful on your way back. Kaim didn't leave. She just sat in the car for the whole night. It could be considered as accompanying her. He didn't know how long he would be able to accompany her. If he could accompany her for a day, then that was one day. If he could accompany her for a night, then that was one night. Early in the morning, when Kaim returned to the apartment, she was surprised to see her mother. Mrs. He sat on the sofa, her face stiff, without a trace of a smile. Kaim stood at the entrance, looking at his mother. After a long while, Mama, he said, Shuheng, break up with her. Kaim was still standing at the door, looking at her mother. After that, he slowly placed the key on the shoe cabinet, walked over slowly, and sat beside Mother He. He wiped his face with his palm and said softly, Mom, I can't let it go. If I could let it go, I wouldn't have started. Mama, he was stunned. She looked at the son she was so proud of and tried to decipher the meaning of his words. Her blood was boiling, and her body couldn't help but tremble. She pointed at Kaim and said sternly, You saw what kind of person she is. Can the He family accept such a slutty woman? She's a murderer. Kaim closed his eyes. Mom, if I give up on her now, she'll have nothing. Mama He's voice became even more stern. She doesn't deserve it. Shuheng, wake up. She'll destroy you. Although the He family wasn't rich and powerful, they had always been innocent. A girl like Su Qing. She would feel guilty if she got involved in the slightest. Chapter 1550. If it weren't for him, she wouldn't have done this. She was helping him, and how could he let her be alone? Mama, he was stunned. She murmured, Shuheng, you've gone mad. Are you going to let me down, your dead father down, and yourself down? Kaim closed his eyes. Mom, I'm giving up on her. I'm not letting anyone down, but I'm letting down my own conscience. He looked at Mama He. She may have committed a heinous crime, but I like her and she loves me. Our love is not sinful. His determination shocked Mama He. She couldn't accept her son like this. She was in a daze. After a long time, she suddenly collapsed. Mom. Kaim called out to her and held her, but Mama He fainted. Kaim sent her to the hospital. She had suffered a stroke, but fortunately, she was saved in time. Mama he didn't talk to Kime when she woke up. She just lay there and refused to eat. He knew that she was silently protesting with her life. Kime stayed in the ward, worried. Day after day passed. Although Mama he was still alive, she was getting more and more haggard. She lay there quietly and didn't look at Kime or talk to anyone. Kime held a bowl of porridge and half-squatted in front of her. He said in a low voice, "Mom, eat something." After this incident, Mama he's health wasn't as good as before. She didn't eat, so her body collapsed. She relied on N4 drip to maintain her health. The doctor said that she had to eat, otherwise it would be detrimental to her condition. She might even collapse. Kime's voice made Mama he open her eyes slightly, but she only took a glance at him before closing them again. She didn't want to look at him anymore. Her voice was soft and indifferent. "I won't eat until you break off with her. Forget it. If you die, I won't have to see you like this." "Mama," he said, tears streaming down her face. She shouldn't have let her son come to this world. If he had stayed in D-City, he wouldn't have met such a girl. She had let down her husband and the He family. She hadn't taken good care of her son. Mama he threatened to kill herself. Kime couldn't watch her commit suicide like this. He begged and even knelt down, but Mrs. He did not budge. 2 weeks later, Mother He's breath was weak, and the expression on her face was like she was dying. Kime knelt down and cried. He held a bowl of porridge in his hands and said in a hoarse voice, "Mom, I won't go and see her. I don't want her anymore, okay?" Mother He opened her eyes slightly and looked at him. Her expression seemed to be a little incredulous. Kime closed her eyes. "Mom, I'm serious." However, his tears never stopped. He was forced to give up on Su Ching. If he didn't, his mother would die, and he couldn't bear the burden of another family member's life. Mama he watched him cry and reached out to wipe away his tears. "Shuheng, you'll forget her. You'll forget her." But she didn't think that her son would never see Su Ching even once in her lifetime. But 10 years later, she would die and Su Ching would come back. Kime promised Mama he and really didn't go to see Su Ching anymore. He entrusted everything about Su Ching to Qin Anlin. He believed that President Qin would do his best. Chapter 1551. Su Ching, on the other hand, was sentenced to death and would be executed in 2 months. The day he received the news, Kime sat alone in the apartment for a very, very long time. From day to night, he was alone, crying quietly. Mama Su sat in her wheelchair, watching her son. She still hadn't relented. She didn't allow him to see Su Ching one last time. He didn't mention it either. He just became even more taciturn. He pushed her out to the park every day, chatted with her and took care of her. When he was at work, there would be an auntie to take care of her. Her health was getting better day by day, but she and her son were becoming more and more distant. He wouldn't tell her anything if he had something to do. Most of the time, he would lock himself in the study for 5 to 6 hours. He lived his life as usual, but he had lost a lot of weight. He was so thin that he was almost out of shape. Mama he wanted to speak up every time, but in the end, she didn't. She told herself that she had made the right choice. If she relented, Shu Heng's life would be over. In the CEO's office of King Entertainment, Qin Anlin looked at Kime. His voice was a little serious. "Aren't you going to see her?" There wasn't much time left. It was only about half a month. Kime's eyes were a little warm. His thin fingers flicked the ash off his cigarette. He looked at Qin Anlin and smiled. But there was no smile in his eyes, and there was no soul in them. Qin Anlin felt his heart ache. He couldn't blame him. Kaim had no choice in this battle. Kaim looked up and said softly, "Tell her that I'll be waiting for her, in the next life." He had once told Su Qing that he didn't want a next life, but now he could only wait for her. In this life, they weren't fated. He thought that he wouldn't get married again. He would wait for his next life with a clean heart. At that time, he could still tell her that she owed him Su Qing. He had waited for her for so long. He thought that if he had someone else, she probably wouldn't care about him. So he wanted to be clean. Qin Anlan's throat seemed to be stuck. After a while, he said, "I will." He paused. "Kaim, if you have a next life, do you still want her?" Kaim's gloomy eyes brightened for a moment, but they soon dimmed again. After a long time, he said softly, "I can wait, but can she wait? Su Qing is pregnant, your child." Qin Anlan's voice was very calm, but it was like a super bomb had been dropped in Kaim's heart. He looked at Qin Anlan with burning eyes, and his hand holding the cigarette kept trembling. He tried his best to steady it but failed. He could only look at Qin Anlan like that. After a long time, he said in a hoarse voice, "Really?" Qin Anlan nodded. "It's only been a month." Kaim changed her death sentence. "If she performs well in the future, it might become 20 years, 10 years. Kaim took a long drag from his cigarette, but his fingers were still trembling uncontrollably. He looked at Qin Anlan with cloudy eyes and clenched his fist. "I'll wait for her. Su Qing, I will wait for you." He cried again. This time, it was tears of joy. Their child. They were going to have a child. How much did she love him? That was why she was willing to give birth to their child when her life was about to end. She loved him. Kaim raised his head and smiled. His Qing Qing wasn't perfect, but at critical times, she was more loyal than any other woman. So what if they weren't together? They would be reunited eventually, and their child too. That day, he went back and pushed Mama He to the park. Mama He could already walk, but he was still pushing her most of the time. Chapter 1552. Mama He's eyes widened. She wanted to make a sound, but she couldn't say a single word. Kaim looked at her seriously and said softly, "Mom, I want this child." Mama He didn't say anything and just stared at him. "Mom, that's my child." Kaim squatted down and looked at her gently. "If it were me, would you not want me?" Mama He's lips moved as she stared at her son. Kaim didn't say anything else. He stood up and pushed her slowly in the small park. There were many elderly people in the park with their children, enjoying the joy of a family. Mama He suddenly put her hand on the back of Kaim's hand and said hoarsely, "You can bring the child back." Kaim's eyes were a little moist. He knew that this was already difficult for his conservative mother. "Thank you, Mom." He continued to push her, murmuring as if to himself, "I won't see her." The more he acted like this, the sadder Mama He became. She asked softly, "Shuhing, will you hate me?" Kaim smiled. "I won't." He really wouldn't. Whether it was him or Su Qing, they had chosen an unconventional path, and his mother had borne what she shouldn't have. He felt guilty, so how could he hate her? Under the setting sun, Kaim stood in the afterglow and watched the sunlight shine on the water. He squatted down and spoke softly to Mama He. He had 10 years to accompany her. 10 years later, she might not be around. At that time, he could accompany Su Qing. He didn't go to see Su Qing, partly because of his mother, and partly because he knew that Su Qing didn't want him to see her in a sorry state. She had always loved to be beautiful, so she must be in a mess now. Kaim smiled slightly. Yi Liangqiu went to see Su Qing. Su Qing was living in a small cubicle alone because she was pregnant. Although the conditions weren't good, it was much better than living in the big room. This place was a little far from B City. Qin Anlin drove for 6 hours to get there. Su Cheng was in a good state of mind. When she saw Yi Liangqiu, she pursed her lips and kept standing. She was wearing a prisoner's uniform, ordinary and empty. She didn't look like the little princess Su Cheng from before at all. She looked at Yi Liangqiu in silence, smiled, sat down, and raised her hand. Yi Liangqiu also raised her hand and pressed it against hers through the glass. Cinderella has returned to her original appearance. Su Cheng had a bitter smile on her face. Yi Liangqiu felt bad for her. Ching, why are you so stupid? This is the best home for me. Isn't it? Su Cheng smiled bitterly. Sister Liangqiu, I've never regretted it. It's just that I never thought I would have this child. She reached out to touch her lower abdomen, a pained expression on her face. She didn't blame Kaim for his choice. She had heard from Anlin Gu that his mother had threatened to kill herself and he had no choice. Actually, she didn't blame him. She did this because she would rather he cut off all ties with her. But the child, Kaim told you to wait for him. Yi Liangqiu's voice was very soft. Su Cheng, I will hand the child over to Kaim. He will take good care of it. Su Chen's eyes widened, unable to believe what she had just said. He wants this child. She pursed her lips and asked cautiously, does his mother want it too? Yi Liangqiu's palm was pressed against hers. That is his child. Ching, you have to come out alive. Because Kaim is waiting for you. Chapter 1553. Su Cheng cried. Although Sister Liangqiu didn't say anything to her, she knew. She understood Kaim's heart. She cried and said, Sister Liangqiu, do you know, I still haven't regretted it. It was only now that she understood that she wouldn't be dirty when she came here. Instead, she would be cleansed of the sins on her body, so that she could be with Kaim with a clear conscience. If she went out that day, she would be able to face Mama He calmly and dare to tell her that she wanted to be with Kaim. Su Cheng smiled. She was crying and laughing at the same time. Yi Liangqiu handed her the things she had brought. She had prepared some of them, but most of them were prepared by Kaim for her. There were nutrition products, underwear, and some daily necessities, afraid that she wouldn't be used to it. Su Cheng held the things and buried her face in them. She didn't speak for a long time. Yi Liangqiu watched quietly for a long time. When she went out, her heart was heavy. Qin Anlin leaned against the front of the car and waited for her. She turned back to look at the four corners of the sky, feeling a little melancholy. She didn't know how many years it would be before Su Cheng was here. And how long would Kaim have to wait? Qin Anlin went forward and put his arm around her shoulder. He said in a low voice, she will be fine because someone is waiting for her. Sitting in the car, she looked at everything in the car. Her comfort was the first priority. She couldn't help but think of Su Cheng again. Su Cheng was used to being pampered. Would she be able to take it? Anlin, I want to come and see Su Cheng often, she said softly. Qin Anlin nodded. If it's inconvenient for you in the future, I'll do it. He patted her hand. I'll get someone to take care of her. The child will be born safely. Yi Liangqiu didn't say anything else. She knew that Anlin did all this for Kaim, and more so to take care of her emotions. When the car drove back to B City, it was already evening. The sky was originally fine, but it was overcast, and it looked like it was going to rain. When she got out of the car, she looked at the sky. Qin Anlin urged, let's go in. It's getting cold. It won't be good if you catch a cold. Yi Liangqiu tilted her head and looked at him. Anlin, I'm born in autumn. I'm not afraid of the cold. You only know how to say silly things. Qin Anlin smiled and brought her into his arms as they went upstairs. But when he returned, he received a call from the housekeeper of the Su mansion, saying that Su Shiqing was sick with lung cancer. Yi Liangqiu held the phone in her hand and was stunned for a moment. She said calmly, "I called the wrong number." She hung up the phone and remained silent. Qin Anlin heard the voice over there. He pursed his lips and said, "If you want to go take a look, then go take a look. ATV's current situation is very bad. The stock market has plunged, and Su Shiqing is surrounded by various scandals. This illness must be caused by anxiety." Yi Liangqiu looked down. "There's no need to see it. Let that kind of person live and die on his own." Qin Anlin did not say anything. He just hugged her and let her face rest on his shoulder. "Liangqiu, his Liangqiu is so silly, if you don't want to see it, then don't." His voice was very calm. "I will always be with you." At the Su mansion, the housekeeper put down the phone and looked at Su Shiqing. Su Shiqing's eyes were more or less longing. He was half lying on the bed. The flesh on his face was almost dry, and he had lost his former high spirits. "She refused, didn't she?" His voice was old and hoarse. The housekeeper was in a difficult position, but he still nodded. "Missy said, she called the wrong number. How could she not know? She just hates me." Su Shiqing sighed and slowly lay down. "She hates me to the core." Chapter 1554. But the more this child resembled him, the more their relationship as father and daughter could not turn back. Su Shiqing smiled softly, and his smile was bitter. It was not a pity, but a pity. The career he created would finally become a bubble. ATV's stock market plummeted, and he was powerless to save it. Not to mention, with his current body, his current reputation, it would be difficult to recover. The only thing he had left was his Liangqiu. He believed that she would be able to fulfill his wish for him. Su Shiqing smiled softly. He waved the housekeeper away, and he took out a photo from the drawer. The photo was a little old. There were two men and a woman, all very young. "After so long, it's time for you to see the light of day again. Are you happy?" Su Shiqing smiled softly, and his smile was full of satisfaction. "I didn't expect that leaving you alive at that time would have such a use." He struggled to get out of bed. Even such a simple action took a lot of effort, and he coughed violently a few times. After doing this, he would find a sanatorium and recuperate. He wanted to live a few more years and watch ATV recover its former glory. He hated that bitch Su Qing, but he never dealt with her because he didn't want to break Liangqiu's bottom line. That child liked Su Qing. If he pushed her too far, even a rabbit would bite. Su Shiqing held the wall and pushed open a door, from which there was a long staircase leading down. As soon as he walked down, there was a cold air coming from inside. Ordinary people couldn't stand it, let alone a sickly person like Su Shiqing. He raised his hand, and a string of dim yellow lights lit up inside. Climbing down the stairs, the lights dimmed again, and there was actually a cold wooden prison inside. Su Shiqing stood still and looked at the person sitting in the wooden prison. "You're finally here." The man's voice was faint, and then he looked up. The light shone on his pale face, without a trace of blood. His hair was also very long, draped over his shoulders, like an ancient person. The clothes on his body were so dirty that it was impossible to tell when he changed them. It was impossible to imagine how long he had lived under such conditions. Su Shiqing looked at the person in front of him and smiled. "We haven't seen each other for more than 10 years. The man chuckled. "It's been more than 10 years, but I've heard what you've done in the past 10 years. Su Shirqing's cell was really exquisitely made. The people outside couldn't hear her cries for help, but they could clearly hear what Su Shirqing was doing in the room, including what Su Shirqing did with his wife. Since that's the case, you should know what I want to do. Su Shirqing chuckled. By the way, don't you care about the woman you eloped with? That person was silent for a long time before saying, I don't care anymore. The mistake had already been made, and it was difficult to reverse it. Why did he still have to ask about that lowly woman? Su Shirqing chuckled, she's dead. He paused for a moment before continuing, those who know too many things don't live long. Especially this kind of woman. I took care of her for you. Are you happy? That person stared at Su Shirqing for a long time before saying in a deep voice, you have no humanity. What is humanity? Su Shirqing's eyes were full of indifference. Humanity is just something that makes people weak. Chapter 1555. The man looked at him for a long time before he said coldly, Su Shirqing, what tricks do you want to play? If you don't take good care of yourself before you die, you will only die faster if you plot against others. Su Shirqing looked at him and said softly, I just want you to reunite with your family. After saying that, he turned around and walked upstairs. The man who was sitting suddenly wanted to stand up when he saw his back. However, he didn't have legs, so he couldn't stand up. He could only crawl on the ground with his hands. His voice was even more mournful, Su Shirqing, what do you want to do to her? Tell me clearly. His voice echoed in the cold and gloomy wooden prison. His voice kept reverberating, like a ghost. The door closed slowly, and Su Shirqing's voice came slowly. We can't tell each other clearly. He was not reconciled. He was not reconciled to the destruction of everything he had painstakingly built. Everyone was happy, and he was like an old man waiting for death. How could he be reconciled to this? Because of Su Cheng's matter, Yi Liangqiu and Qin Anlan's wedding was postponed to October. Yi Liangqiu was already 3 months pregnant, and her belly was slightly bulging. When she tried on the dress, Qin Anlan personally served her, and the dress had been changed again and again. My waist is so thick. She looked up at him. Qin Anlan smiled and reached out to touch her belly. That's our baby daughter growing up slowly. When she was pregnant with Mu Yun, he didn't participate. Because there were too many things before, he didn't have the mood to feel joy. At this time, he really felt like a father for the first time. However, this joy couldn't be known to little Mu Yun. Anlan. She put on the wedding dress. Because the hem was loose, he couldn't see that she was pregnant. Instead, she looked a little more plump. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips. The people around me left too quickly. She gently turned around and rested her face on his shoulder. Her arms gently wrapped around his waist. We'll be fine, right? Qin Anlan grunted in acknowledgement and patted her. Why are you so melancholic? Yi Liangqiu smiled but didn't say anything. In fact, she knew that a few days ago, Su Shirqing went to the hospital and got into a car accident on the way. It was caused by Anlan. He didn't say, and she didn't ask. Because of that blood relationship, she couldn't deal with Su Shirqing like he did. But she didn't stop him. Her heart was heavy. She thought that no matter how much she hated that person, if he died, she might be sad. But, if that person lived, everyone could die. Because Su Shirqing was crazy. Qin Anlan looked at her expression and probably knew what she was thinking. He reached out and stroked her hair. These were the darkest and darkest things in their hearts, the only things that could not be shared. And after that, they would use a long time to heal each other's scars. This was something that both he and Liangqiu had to bear. She lifted her face and buried herself in his arms. The wedding was a week later. On that day, Xiaoxin and little Mu Yun were the flower girls. Originally, the bridesmaids and groomsmen were Su Qing and Kaim, but now that Su Qing was gone, the groomsmen and bridesmaids were changed to artists from King Entertainment. All the female artists from King Entertainment wanted to be President Qin's bridesmaids. Although President Qin was married, it wasn't a big deal to have a confidant in the entertainment industry. Chapter 1556. When Yi Liangqiu saw the group of bridesmaids, she still felt uncomfortable. Because Xia Mian was also there. She was wearing a light blue gown, revealing her cleavage and long, slender legs. Her long hair was tied up high, revealing her fair neck. She had the ambition to steal the bride's limelight. Yi Liangqiu remembered that Xia Mian wasn't an actress from King Entertainment. Why was she here? She paused and finally stopped beside Xia Mian. This was not auspicious, but Yi Liangqiu knew that she had to do this. Xia Mian had dared to come to her wedding. If she didn't do something, she would disappoint Xia Mian. Qin Anlan's eyes fell on Yi Liangqiu. He was waiting for her at the altar, but she was still dawdling. Yi Liangqiu's voice was soft and gentle. "Miss Xia, help me drag the hem of my dress." Xia Mian's eyes widened. She knew that Yi Liangqiu would notice her and might even suspect her relationship with President Qin. However, she didn't expect that Yi Liangqiu would be so calm. She even asked her to drag the hem of her dress. She instinctively refused. "I'm a bridesmaid." "Isn't that the job of a bridesmaid?" Yi Liangqiu smiled. "Miss Xia, you think the daily salary is too low. I'll ask Anlan to give you an extra 1,000. This was a complete humiliation. Although it was a little harsh, Yi Liangqiu felt that she didn't need to show mercy to a girl like her. Xia Mian didn't seem to know what it meant to give up. She was chasing a man all the way to the wedding. How could she not care about him? Qin Anlan didn't notice it at first, but then he noticed that Xia Mian was indeed there. He didn't look too good either. He felt that he had never given Xia Mian any hints, nor had he given her any hope. Xia Mian didn't move, but Yi Liangqiu was waiting. Qin Anlan didn't take pity on her or say anything to help her out. The atmosphere was tense, and Xia Mian had brought this upon herself. A wisp of warmth appeared in her eyes. She bit her small and delicate lips, looking extremely pitiful and humiliated. She finally squatted down. But when her fingers touched the hem of Yi Liangqiu's dress, Yi Liangqiu's voice was indifferent. "Have you thought it through? Your dream was to chase after a man who didn't belong to you." Xia Mian had said that she would become the best actress, but now she was like a mouse looking for a chance to take advantage of a loophole. Yi Liangqiu felt sorry for her. She was even more foolish than she was in the past. Dressed like this, she bent down so that all the men could get a glimpse of her. But Xia Mian didn't care. She wanted to stay. "This is the path you chose." Yi Liangqiu walked forward slowly. Her voice was very soft. "No one decided for you." She had never hated anyone, not even Mo Xiaoqi back then. Tomorrow, she would demand that all of Xia Mian's paths be sealed. She wanted this girl to be unable to survive in B City. Yes, she was jealous. She hated that Xia Mian looked at Anlan with that weak look. That disgusted her. Xia Mian really disgusted her. However, Yi Liangqiu wasn't one to be trifled with. She asked Xia Mian to squat down and tidy up the hem of her dress. Then, she exchanged rings with Qin Anlan and kissed him. Xia Mian's eyes stung. She admitted that she was a bitch. She shouldn't have come. Chapter 1557. Qin Anlin didn't even look at her. Not only that, but he didn't wait for the banquet. Instead, he called the PR manager in charge of the wedding and asked her to remove Xia Mian from the team. What was going on? She was trying to make him unhappy on the day of his wedding. Liang Qiu was angry. How could they consummate their marriage tonight? Of course, he couldn't touch Yi Liangqiu right now. But even if he couldn't touch her, it would be nice to nibble on her. It was better than having nothing at all. Everyone was relieved after Xia Mian was replaced, especially his wife, who looked like she was getting married. Qin Anlin breathed a sigh of relief and brought Yi Liangqiu to 2 tables of wine. Most of them were elders and relatives. He was worried that she was too tired and worried about her mood. After all, she didn't have any relatives present. Fortunately, it was Tang Yu who handed her to Qin Anlin at the wedding. And it was Qin Anlin who owed her. Even though it was such a grand occasion, it couldn't hide the fact that she had lost her family. Qin Anlin took her to the lounge upstairs. He was a little drunk, but he still helped her to the luxurious bed covered with red sheets. Yi Liangqiu was a little tired, but it was better than him being drunk. He was the one who took her up, but in the end, it was Qin Anlin who fell on the bed. Yi Liangqiu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She reached out and pulled him. "They're waiting for you downstairs, President Qin." She didn't pull him up. Instead, he pulled her down. In the end, she lay in his arms and he put his palm on her belly so that he wouldn't hurt the baby. Yi Liangqiu covered her heart. Looking at his charming face, she hit him and said, "Bastard." He pretended to be drunk. Qin Anlin smiled lightly. "If I didn't pretend to be drunk, why would they let me come up?" At this moment, she was wearing a red wedding dress. The wedding dress was like fire. Her facial features were delicate and pretty, just like a woman getting married in ancient times. Qin Anlin put his hand on the back of her head and slowly took off a dragon and phoenix hairpin. Her long black hair suddenly fell down, like a curtain, messing up his eyes. He clasped her shoulders, looked up slowly, and kissed her lips. Her long hair scattered around, as if forming a small world. In that world, there was only him and her. The kiss was light and gentle, as if he was afraid of hurting her or scaring her. "Liangqiu." He called her name as he stared at her. She wouldn't know that his heart felt like it was about to jump out of his chest. That kind of satisfaction was something he had never felt before. She was finally his wife, Qin Anlin's exclusive woman. He cupped her face and kissed her face, her eyebrows, her red lips. "Liangqiu, you look so beautiful today." His voice was extremely hoarse. Many women could be considered beautiful, but not everyone could use the word beautiful. Tonight, she was so beautiful that it was intoxicating. She was like water, like a ball of fire, burning him completely. However, he was drunk after all. After kissing for a while, he let go of her with a low smile and fell to the side. "I might not be able to do it tonight." His breath was warm as it sprayed onto her soft neck. Then, he reached out and pulled her into his embrace. Turning over, he whispered into her ear and told her how happy he was to be able to marry her. Chapter 1558. Yi Liangqiu just wanted to get up, but he pulled her back and held her carefully. "I'm not drunk. Let me hold you for a while." He held her as he wished and buried his face in her. "Liangqiu, let me hold you for a while." She felt a little helpless. He said that he was not drunk, but he was obviously drunk. However, his breath was warm, and so was his body. She was more or less moved. So, she lay down with him in the wedding dress and enjoyed the peace of life. On such a joyous day, it was wonderful to have such time to lie down quietly. Her long hair was like a waterfall. The person who said he wanted to hold her for a while was not very obedient. Tonight was his wedding night. He lowered his head and kissed her little mouth. It was warm, but he was not satisfied. He sat up and held her in his arms. She was unprecedentedly gentle. She leaned in his arms and did not let him kiss her for a while. She lowered her head and put her finger on his chest. Why is she in the bridesmaid group? Chin Anlin let out a long sigh. He knew she would ask that. He lay down and let her lie on his shoulder. He looked at her and reached out his hand to touch her delicate face. He sighed. It turned out that the newly married Liangqiu could be so beautiful. If I say I don't know, will you believe me? He pinched her little face and smiled faintly. He pulled her to his level and looked into her eyes with a smile. Liangqiu, you look like you're jealous. Yi Liangqiu kissed his lips. Yes, I am jealous. She looked so cute at this moment. She pouted her lips and looked up at him. She was married to him in a wedding dress. Chin Anlin's heart was filled with lofty sentiments. Right now, he was dressed in fine clothes and riding on a horse. He wanted to do something, but he was worried about the child in her belly. In the end, he didn't do anything. He only lightly touched her belly. He paused for a while and then said calmly, Liangqiu, no matter how long it takes, I won't have another woman, let alone Xiaomian. He reached out to touch her head again and smiled. But I'm still very happy that you mind. After saying that, he kissed her on the lips. Thinking of the guests downstairs, he kissed her again. I have to go down now. Wait for me to come back to the bridal chamber. She looked at him and snorted, You're not serious at all. Chin Anlin smiled and touched her face. Then, he adjusted his clothes and prepared to go down. Wait a minute, she called to him. Chin Anlin stood by the bed while she knelt by it. Can't bear to part with me. He lowered his head and couldn't stop himself from kissing her again. He couldn't bear to leave, but if he didn't go down now, he was afraid that they would come up and make trouble. She was pregnant, so it wasn't suitable for them to be in public. After kissing and rubbing, he finally let go of her. You have lipstick on the corner of your mouth. She blushed and helped him wipe it off. Chin Anlin didn't mind. It's quite sweet. Cupping her face, he said, Baby, wait for me. After kissing a few times, she finally stopped. She knelt there, reached out her hand to touch her lips, and smiled softly. Anlin looked very happy. She could really make him happy. She could make him happy. She smiled blissfully. Then, she got off the bed gently and took a shower. She changed into a white silk pajamas, the kind that looked very sexy. She sprayed some natural perfume, which smelled like roses. Lying on the red sheets, she felt tempted. Chapter 1559. 2 hours later, Chin Anlin returned to the suite. He was helped into the room. The one who brought him in was Kaim. After helping him into the living room, Chin Anlin sat down on the sofa. After calming himself down, he began to make a ruckus. Liangqiu, darling, your husband is back. Another person smiled at Kaim. Let's go first. Leave this to President Qin. There was a hint of warmth in his smile. How could he not understand? Kaim lowered his eyes. He was reminded of Su Qing. Su Qing was also pregnant. However, they could not be together for the time being. He could not even see her once. He was afraid that if he did, he would not be able to hold on. He would break his mother's heart. Kaim retreated and declined the invitation to join the gathering. Then, he walked alone in the cold and empty courtyard of the hotel. The moonlight shone down on the ground, creating a faint glow. The strong night wind blew his hair and the cigarette he was smoking. He sat on the bench, his expression even colder than the night. He knew very well what kind of place prison was. He did not go to see her. However, he secretly stood under the sky and looked at the place she was staying. She was so small, so restricted. With her lively personality, how could she get used to it? Ching Ching, you said you did not regret your choice. Then, I won't either. If you want to atone for the mistakes you made, then, I will be with you. You are inside and I am outside. However, if you know my heart, you will know that I am waiting for you. He picked up a bottle of beer and gulped it down. It did not take long for over 10 bottles to be scattered on the floor. That night, Kam drank himself into oblivion. It was only in this state that he dared to call out her name. Only in this state did he dare to let it out. Only in this state did he dare to cry out. Some people were happy while others were sad. Compared to Kim's coldness, GM Hotel's presidential suite was filled with sweetness. Chin Anlin sobered up slightly. Relying on his instincts, he staggered back to the room. The moment he entered the room, he was stunned for a moment. Then, he slowly sat on the edge of the bed, reached out to remove his tie and threw it to the side. He then loosened his collar and looked at her with a burning gaze. Uncontrollably, he leaned over and kissed her. As he kissed and rubbed her to wake her up, he murmured, "If I had known that you would wait for me like this, I would have come earlier." However, no matter how tempting she was, he only dared to kiss her and did not dare to do anything else. In the end, he really had no choice but to carry her and walk to the bathroom. "Hubby will take you to take a bath together." Yi Liangqiu woke up. Being hugged by him like that, she was a little scared. She reached out and hugged his neck tightly. "Anlin, put me down." He did not let go and kissed her again. "I'm not letting go." The voice whispered in her ear, "I won't let you fall." She glanced at him. "You're so drunk." Chin Anlin smiled and carried her into the bathroom. He pressed down on her and kissed her again. After kissing her, he pulled at her in a messy manner and said dirty things from his mouth. "Call me hubby. Hubby will help bathe the baby." It was useless for her to struggle. He was not as gentle as usual when he was drunk. He was a little forceful and was more like a child playing house. She could only let him be. Soaking in the water together, she sighed softly. "Anlin, I've never thought that we could really get married." Everything was so beautiful that it made her want to cry. But behind this beauty, there was too much pain. She lay on his chest and even wondered if all of this would not have happened if she had not returned back then. Was his world, Su Cheng's world, Kim's world, and everyone else's world peaceful and beautiful? Chapter 1560. Chin Anlin was drunk all the time. He held her face and kissed her affectionately. His voice was a little muffled. "Silly Liangqiu, in this world, there were no ifs. If there were any ifs, it was everyone's own choice." He kissed her and pressed her jade-like face against his chest. Suddenly, he was filled with lofty sentiments. He felt that it was enough to just hug her on such a quiet night. Nothing else mattered. He reached out and stroked her back. Then he lowered his head and whispered in her ear, "This is what it feels like to be a husband." "Liangqiu, what about you?" Her face was pressed against his chest. It was indescribably soft. She rubbed it again and grunted in agreement. Chin Anlin's blood instantly heated up. He wanted to kiss her. He held her face and kissed her for a while. He was afraid that he couldn't control himself, so he put her down. After soaking for a while, he was probably sober. He looked down at her and realized that she was almost asleep. Chin Anlin smiled and wiped his face with a towel. He picked her up and kissed her lightly. Baby, don't fall asleep. We still have to consummate our marriage. When he said that, she giggled. She was so happy that she couldn't stop giggling. As she lay down, she put her arms around his neck. Anlin, what are you going to do? After a while, she seemed to be in love with him. She lifted her body and moved closer to his ear. She even took a small bite of him and asked mischievously, Hubby, what are you going to do tonight? He was happy that she could do this. His fingers caressed her delicate face. Marriage only happened once in a lifetime. If she was in a bad mood, then it would be his fault. Chin Anlin lowered his head and kissed the corner of her mouth. He chuckled softly. Baby, what do you think I should do? His fingers moved down her arm and clasped her hand. Their fingers intertwined. He stared at her delicate face. He felt that he would never get tired of looking at it for the rest of his life. He reached out and gently rubbed her face. His voice was alluring. Baby. No. She turned her face to the side. There was a faint blush on her cheeks. He reached out and gently touched her. She shyly stepped aside. Chin Anlin smiled, his voice a little hoarse. You're still shy after so many times. She nodded and buried herself in his arms. Her voice was especially soft. Don't move. Her fair skin, contrasted with the red, looked especially sparkling and translucent. He almost couldn't bear to let go of her. He just lay there with her, saying intimate words and teasing her. Half the night actually passed. In the end, it didn't work out because she was pregnant. He was unwilling to let her go just like that and waste his wedding night, but he was also indescribably satisfied. When they woke up in the morning, their gazes met, each with a different kind of charm and gentleness. Good morning, hubby. She took the initiative to hug his waist and kissed him on the corner of his mouth. Chin Anlin's voice was a little hoarse. That's it. His voice was unbelievably hoarse. She pressed her lips against his and whispered, What do you want then? Her whole body fell limp in his arms. He wouldn't be a man if he could resist it. So he leaned against her ear and whispered a few words. She looked at him in surprise and then turned her face away. He thought that she would refuse, but he didn't expect that she would turn her little face away and say in a low voice, Really? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.